So the follow-up of the previous event is a panel discussion titled New Alliances in the Times of New Authoritarianisms. It has been also conceived and organized and proposed by Bартоша Фронцков'яка, and this is actually in a literal sense a follow-up of the performative lecture, since it's dedicated to the those connections in relations that existed and still are the case between Eastern Europe and the Middle East regions. Because it's just this panel is rather a projection for the present and for the future than a history. It's rather based or inspired by those relations that existed in the past, in the socialist times. But the topic of this one is basically that we observe similar developments both in Eastern Europe and the Middle East in terms of different forms of authoritarian rule, anti-refugee practices, criminalization of civil dissent, escalation of violence and oppression. So this panel aims to put a question about possible alliances, coalitions or support networks to oppose those authoritarian tendencies. And apart from those speakers whom I already introduced, we also have two new ones, and I'm really happy to welcome Yassina Hadj Saleh and Inဃи Gaidarovich with us. Thank you so much for coming, for kindly accepting our invitation. Yassina Hadj Saleh was born in Raqqa, Syria in 1961. He used to be a political prisoner between 1980 and 1996 for being a member of the Communist Party opposing the regime of Hafez Assad. He's a journalist writing both in Arab and English to different newspapers, magazines and outlets. He's the author of 7 books in Arabic about Syria, jail, contemporary Islam and Islamism and culture. In English, I would just mention his book, The Impossible Revolution, Revolution, Civil War and the General War in Syria, which was published in 2017. And he is also a founding member of Al-Jamhuriya group that writes a lot about Syrian matters and affairs since 2012. He was awarded the Prince Claus Prize in 2012 and the Swedish Pen Club Prize in 2017. And he is also a fellow of the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin in 2017-2019. And Inဃi Gaidarovich, on whose interviews the performative lecture was based, as I mentioned. She is a sociologist and activist, and currently a PhD student at the Jagiellonian University. And in her research, she raises issues of participatory democracy, grassroots initiatives, and feminist movements. And from the beginning of the so-called migration crisis, in quotation marks, she has been involved in the work of the initiative called Welcome in Krakow, that aims to prepare grounds for refugees who may come to Poland and works for other refugee groups from the Balkan route and the Middle East. And she is currently working on her PhD on participatory grassroots initiatives supporting Syrian refugee women in Lebanon. And she is currently based in Beirut. Thank you so much again. Bартоша Фронцков'яка, Yassina Hadj Saleh, Inဃi Gaidarovich, Макса Цеґєльського. Bартоша Фронцков'яка will be moderating the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Vasil, thank you so much. And I would like also, on behalf of Biennale Warszawa and also part of EBA, so this East Europe Biennial Alliance, thank everybody from Kyiv Biennale for this kind invitation. And it's a really big pleasure to be here and to have possibility to meet you and to discuss these issues. And the plan for the next part of our evening is to start with the lecture, the speech, the proposal, or maybe even the manifesto written by Yassina Hadj Saleh, that is about problematizing solidarity, and there is also some kind of positive proposal in Yassina's speech about the third solidarity. We will hear what it means, the first solidarity, So we would like to start with this speech as a kind of inspirational speech, and then we will discuss some thoughts, some ideas that are like somehow brought from the speech, and try to figure out what we can do, because this panel is also about like trying to find some solutions, some proposals, some new alliances. It's also the topic of this year Biennale in Kiev. So how we can like collaborate, how we can re-alliance, and how we can think about solidarity, and how we can, it's even more important, how we can practice solidarity in a new way that is adequate to the current state of affairs. I mean, very much this, authoritarian time that we are experiencing now in many parts of the world, because it's a global issue. It's not like only local problem, but it's something that is happening globally right now in a kind of synchronicity. But it's also very much with a very like strong local expression, and also in Poland, in Belarus, and like other places. I would also like to somehow refer to to what's happening now on the Polish-Belarusian border, that is like important context also to this meeting. Yeah, and I would also like to invite you to join our conversation, and not to make it just that we will discuss this in some isolation, but really please comment, disagree, propose, and let's have a conversation together about this. So yeah, again, thank you, Vasil and Yassine. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bartek. Thank you, Vasil. Is it working?
Yeah.
So, and I have to apologize first of all of Inga and Max, because, well, I wrote this because I misunderstood the invitation. I thought that I was asked to give a talk, so I wrote something. Then it appeared that it is a panel, so, but these two people thought that I still should read the text. That is therefore, it is their responsibility. Yeah, sorry. I think it will take half an hour, so please bear with me a bit. I'm happy to be here in Kiev. As a former communist Ukraine, as a part of the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc, I felt I identify with these people easily. And I've been here since the day before yesterday. I went to Maidan. Today I went to the famine monument, and I felt that my identification is even is free from ideology now, and is based more on suffering. I have been touched extremely by these two.
You can just take
by what I saw in these 2 days. So again, I'm happy to be with you. This is maybe most of the people here are from Eastern Europe. I am from Syria. I am from the Middle East, and I feel maybe the situations are not identical here and there, but people can understand easily each other when they have stories of suffering. So I hope in this text that I'll introduce some ideas that can interpret our situation today in the world at large, which is very ambitious, but at least the ones among us who are interested in a better world. So in a way, I am still that old communist, though I hope I'm, at the same time, I can pretend that I am not. I am not. Yeah, but I still have this utopian element, this dream of a better and more egalitarian world. So where are my glasses? So the title of this talk is Problematizing Solidarity. My intention in this talk is to problematize the concept of solidarity by contextualizing it, pitting it in the present situation of the world, differentiating between its different historical formulations, and by politicizing it. This, I believe, reinvigorates the concept rather than compromising it, though it questions its clarity and refuses to take its political innocence for granted. There are no innocent concepts. For a way to give meaning to the present global critical situation, one may refer to Gramsci's conception of his time crisis. I quote, "The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a phase between a transitional phase between two stages, in this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. The new to be given birth to is, to my mind, a more democratic global society where humanity share gains, losses, and responsibilities for life on the planet. That is to think of humanity as a solidarity unit and to develop a global conscience. This may sound hopelessly utopian, even irresponsible given the fact that many societies seem to be unable to just keep going. My country is one of them, unfortunately, let alone secure better life for their members. But apart from the fact that the situations of different societies is growingly a function of international processes and relationships, the global society is already inscribed on our horizon today because of the inherently global character of the world problems. Environmental degradation, first of all, pandemics, the revolution in communication and issues related to infotech and biotech, the Islamic question, which is a global question in my opinion, and issues related to the complex of terror, security, racism, among so many other problems. So all these are global. The global attention to the American elections in 2020, the COVID-19 state of exception, and the widespread tense feeling after the terrorist crime in France when a history teacher was assassinated by a Muslim migrant, give us glimpses in a seemingly irreversible process of global society formation. The global society is already there. What is not there yet is thinking of it as a solidarity unit with equal dignity and rights for all. Obviously, our world today is deeply divided, characterized by inherent and growing inequalities, and generating much frustration and hatred. We are in a crisis because we don't have a vision about how to proceed. Practically, we are in a TINA situation. TINA is, it was coined, it is acronyms from there is no alternative. It was said by Margaret Thatcher in the early 1980s to say that there's no alternative to capitalism and neoliberal capitalism. So we are living again in this situation. Our crisis today is one of loss of direction. We don't know where to go from here. So we just stick to where we are, and I think this applies to the US, to prosperous Western countries, or even turn to the good old days, or to an imaginary golden era, like in our part of the world, Muslim empires of the past, and yeah. But there are no solutions in the past for problems of the present, so much as there are no local solutions for global problems. And I think this is the essence of our problem today. That the problems are global, essentially, and politics is still within nation states. To the morbid symptoms that Gramsci talked about belong genocratic movements and tendencies growing presently everywhere. Like genocratic or genocracy is derived from genos, which means a race or tribe or a community. It is a Greek word, and cracy, rule or something. So I think we see more and more ascendance of cultural or racial, I'll come soon to this, but it is just to give you an idea. So it is related to nationalism, to the nation, to ethnicity, to religion, to something given in the past. It is just opposite of democracy. So what are examples of the genocratic movements? Right-wing populism in Europe, AfD in Germany, for instance, white supremacy in the US, Zionism plus after the Basic Law in 2018, the Israeli government issued the Basic Law that decides Israel is a Jewish state, which foreignized Palestinians on their own land and under their own country. Islamism in the Muslim part of the world, Erdoganism in Turkey, Hindutva in India, that India is a country of Hindus. Full stop. There are big minorities, Muslims and non-Muslims are being foreignized as well. Putinism in Russia, and so on and so forth. Genocracy is sort of communitarian rule, whether the community is national, ethnic, racial, or religious. And these four categories, if you remember, are the ones cited by the UN Genocide Convention in 1948. Genocide was defined as targeting or destroying in full or in part an ethnic or national or religious or racial group. So these genocratic movements can be the infrastructure of genocides. I mean, when India is interpreted as Hindus, essentially, or when my country Syria is interpreted as Muslim, essentially, or when Germany should be perceived as the country of ethnically German, white, Christian, genocide is in front of us. Or this is a possibility. Our future is open to this possibility. When Israel is defined as a Jewish state, the Palestinians should be marginalized or crushed in different ways or killed or whatever. Moreover, genocracies display a responsible position towards environment based on traditional absolute sovereignty, which combines the threat of ecocide, which means ecocide is like genocide, is destroying the ecological basis of our life. which combines the threat of ecocide to that of genocide. Trump in the US and Bolsonaro in Brazil are prominent examples. And now, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, the first summit was ended, and with nothing. It was about environment, and it seems that nothing concrete came out of it. Needless to say that democracy is diametrically opposed to democracy, the constitutional rule of changing political majority while guaranteeing the rights of minority. Democracy is the rule of political majority, changing political while guaranteeing the rights of minorities. Democratic tendencies seem to indicate to a direction other than global society. I just said that we have already, global society is already there. True, but they cannot be understood, these democratic tendencies cannot be understood in isolation from the processes leading to this burgeoning society, global society. The democratic term can be best understood as a reactionary retreat before globalization. I don't think that globalization is great, but it is like capitalism in Marx analysis. It brings people together. It is a move forward after feudalism, but it creates its inequalities and it is problems. So I think these democratic movements are reactionary retreat before globalization. That's why they are morbid symptoms. In these deteriorating circumstances, solidarity, as it has been thought of and practiced on the international level, is unlikely to survive. Presently, it seems that solidarity itself is in a crisis, especially when it is understood as a form of political activism in times of a global crisis today. Solidarity has little chance to be part of the solution after democratic term unless it is coupled with a vision of democratizing the emerging global society. At this juncture, it seems that what is mostly needed is awareness of the political nature of the world crisis today. The latter goes beyond what Habermas, Jürgen Habermas, dubbed in a recent paper, actually it's not very recent now, it is more than a year ago, as a world, I quote, world termed more authoritarian and strife-torn. It goes beyond that to growing worldlessness, where we live close to each other, but not together, where we don't share movements, meanings, and responsibilities. This condition is no longer restricted to refugees, to which Hannah Arendt was referring when she coined the term worldlessness. It tends to be the universal condition of a world based on sovereign states. This condition is really nurturing nihilism, militant and violent nihilism like the Islamist one we have in our part of the world, or not like the black nihilism held by Calvin Warren as a political apostasy. So it is basically it is suspicious about the methods black activists struggled for equality and for rights in the US, which are peaceful and trying to show that black people are good and they deserve equal rights. This is more militant and it is not only against white superiority, it is also against this peaceful mode of black activism. So it is a sort of political apostasy oriented against politics of hope embraced by generations of emancipatory black activists who symbolize, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King. Democracy, worldlessness, and the emergent global society are not in an exclusionary relationship. They go together, with the first two being morbid symptoms of the birth of the latter, the global society. To counterpoise this backward push to worldlessness and to democracy, I believe that a principle of global responsibility is to be articulated as the basis for global regime change and for global society to better world the planet, as a verb here, to better inhabit the planet. The United Nations is dysfunctional more and more, and the oligarchy of the UN Security Council is leading us to less security and more division. International organizations function at best according to crisis management method. Containment and trying to build some common grounds between the aggressors and well dominated, between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and we know this method has now led to the very entity of the Palestinians is being eaten away day by day. International organizations, so corporations, so I said something about the UN, the Security Council. Corporations don't care about the environment. Sovereign states don't care about the world. Religions don't care about humanity. Intellectuals are more confused and less courageous today than they were 2 generations ago, up to 1970s. But this is what it means to be in a crisis. We are in a crisis because we already live in a global society while our international system is still referring to sovereign nation states. The priority in this situation goes to a better diagnosis of our global predicament, and certainly to developing better ways to deal with it. As a method of mobilizing and organizing, mobilization and organization, solidarity comes second. I'll say that was what comes first. Allow me to give some examples of this polarization, prioritization. In the face of COVID-19 crisis, solidarity is a necessity rather than a virtue. Still, the priority has been for an efficient health system and for developing a vaccine or vaccines. To ask people to show solidarity will have a waning effect the longer the crisis lasts. And for a year, actually, people were asked to express their solidarity, and I think if a vaccine was not introduced, it would have been to social upheavals and problems. Solidarity will not solve that problem when people are dying and when you don't have efficient health system. Another example from my country, Syria, makes the point even clearer. Syrians have been expected to show national unity by a genocratic oligarchy that has been foreignizing most of them for decades. The Assad family has been ruling the country for 51 years, so longer than the socialist this national unity talk has diminishing effect during 50 years of the ruling Syria through civil war, through cold civil war, a rule that has narrowed the country more and more to the degree of explosion, which we know that happened really 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago. Similarly, solidarity is not the solution of the present democratic and worldless condition, though it could be a precious method for bringing together people who believe that we are passengers in the same boat, the only one we have. What justifies thinking of solidarity crisis is two problems one detect in practices of solidarity in Europe, where I've been living for a bit more than 4 years. First of all, solidarity practices are characterized by a power relation. Those who give solidarity and those who receive it are not equal. I give you solidarity because I can give you something. You cannot give me anything. So this takes solidarity away from equality and closer to patronage. Then there's an oligarchic capitalist marketplace for causes, which leaves it to the weak, different, weak people or agents from of many causes to compete for the rare support of solidarity suppliers in Europe. Was even more than this power relation and the market of causes. What's even more crucial is the fact that the seat of this depoliticized solidarity lies solely in the West. To better grasp the significance of this point, let's remember that between 1950s and 70s, and it seems that up to early 80s, according to the presentation we saw by Bartek and Max, the seat of solidarity was the post-colonial world. It was the time of non-alignment of Afro-Asian solidarity or the three continents. And the socialist bloc was, in a way, trying to patronize, actually, these solidarity movements. It was the time of, this form of international solidarity was oriented against the former colonial powers and imperialism in the capitalist West. In a later stage, with the fall of communism and the victory of neoliberalism on a global scale, solidarity migrated to the West in the 1990s. The westward migration should be understood as one aspect of a broader migration following the end of the Cold War and as a consolidation of the West-centered world after the interlude of decolonization, where history looked moving away from the old continent, away from Europe. The solidarity migration was one phase of the process that has led to the emergence of post-migrant societies in richer and free Western countries. And I think AfD in Germany is also can be perceived as a reaction to the fact that Germany has been transformed to a post-migrant society. I mean, I guess those who came from Turkey, from Poland, from now from Syria, from Africa, more than 10% or 15% of the population, and this is not taken in the self-perception of the country. AfD is the party who defends a German, ethnic German, Christian, white German. So, there are no politicians who can defend courageously the reality of Germany as a post-migrant society, or of France. It is the same, though the migrants are from North Africa or from Africa or more than from Turkey. In the Netherlands, from Turkey, from Morocco, for instance. So all these in the US, from the Hispanics, from Mexico, from South America, from Cuba, and these are not reflected in the formation and the institutions and the constitution of these countries. So the solidarity migration was one phase of the process that has led to the emergence of post-migrant societies in the richer and freer Western countries. And it was depoliticized the way migration was and still is. What's meant by depoliticized solidarity is that it is divorced from a vision of a different world, and it is not a creator of new meanings and symbols. Depoliticizing solidarity tends systematically to humanitarianize it, and to deal with the migrants as humanitarian cases. Denied their political agency, their ethical agency. They cannot decide what's good and what's bad for them, and their epistemological agency. They cannot analyze their situations. They cannot define their causes. They cannot develop theories and concepts about their struggles. It is the German, the French, the European, the white, usually man, who develop analysis and values and political frameworks for analysis. For refugees, this approach takes a form of denying their political agency. So integration policies, the ones I know rather well in Germany, are based on not taking notice of the post-migrant process, leaving the door open to democratic movements like the AfD in Germany, rather than an alternative for Deutschland, which is, AfD is an acronym of Alternative for Deutschland. This democratic party is born out of absence of real and progressive alternative in Germany, in the German post-migrant society. In France, the post-migrant society is facing even bigger challenge, as was shown by Macron's talk about Islam crisis, which is true. Islam has a very big crisis actually, and Islamic separatism, and then the reactions to the heinous killing of Samuel Paty, a history teacher, as we mentioned, by a migrant of Chechenian origin. Presently, a widespread feeling of crisis is showing itself more and more, and one expects more initiative for affirmative action on the global level. COVID-19 is just lent an edge of urgency to this feeling. This entails effort for a third solidarity. I already mentioned something of between 1950s and 70s of solidarity seated in post-colonial countries, three continents non-alignment, Afro-Asian with the socialist bloc helping and Poland sending people to Iraq, to Libya, to engineers, and under this, actually, the one good point is that the people there were earning more incomes than their possible incomes here, but still, I am not taking it cynically. Still, I think there was honest will to help in a way. We'll not go into details about this. This entails efforts for third solidarity based on analysis of the global situation, and the second, of course, that we saw new liberal solidarity, 1990s and after, which is market. There's a market of causes, which is a power relation, and which is seated solely in prosperous Western countries. So we need a third solidarity. It's, of course, in my mind, as a former communist, I'm thinking of the first international, second international, and then the third international. In a way, this is in the background. Third solidarity based on analysis of the global situation and exploiting the still more convenient conditions available in post-migrant societies in the West. Before it disappears, these conditions, there's still some plurality. before it disappears and identity and border politics replaces it. Now, the main topics are identity and the border. And I guess we are seeing a brand new example now between Belarus and Poland. So while this is convenient starting point, I mean maybe from Western countries, more plural, where politics is still showing some plurality. While this is a convenient starting point, dismantling Eurocentrism should never be left to disappear from our sides. All centrisms lead to worldlessness today, and by no means to world fullness, so to speak, or to amor mundi. Amor mundi is not concerned by St. Augustine, but it means to care about the world, to love the world, to care about the world. We need to decenter the world without sacrificing universalism, as many tend to do. Many post-colonial thinkers and intellectuals, they are quite skeptical about universalism. It is a guise of colonialism. I don't agree with this at all. Universalism can and should take a form of global equal rights and global responsibilities. On this basis, a new politicized solidarity can be different from the depoliticized and worldless mode of solidarity that we've been living with in the last 3 decades. The Progressive International that was launched in May 2020, so just a year, and so the Progressive International is an initiative by some leftist intellectuals, activists. Some of them are superstars, very famous. Noam Chomsky, Arundhati Roy from India, Yanis Varoufakis, the finance minister of Greek years ago, and Naomi Klein of Canada, the Shock Doctrine, the author of the Shock. And well, it was launched a year and a half ago. I have some personal story. I will not tell it to you. I was invited to join, then abruptly there were no communication at all. After I wrote to them a letter as a Syrian saying that I thought that I can criticize my leftist comrades. We Syrians are angry of you because this and this and that. And after I sent the letter, there was full, they disappeared. They just disappeared. It was their initiative to contact me. However, I published the letter then in our site, Jumhuriyet. And if you are interested, you can find that a letter to the Progressive International, an open letter to the Progressive International, and with some details of what happened between us. So I have a perplexingly disappointing personal story with the IP, and I think it refers to the dominant leftist perception of the Syrian struggle rather than to my humble person. I don't think it was personal, indeed. I see it as a refusal to recognize the emancipatory potential of our struggle and a power relation not different from the depoliticized solidarity and from imperialism itself. It consolidates the condition of worldliness, though in the name of internationalism. The PI, the Progressive International, rejected an opportunity to be a space of debate and the critical thinking, of plurality, and has already shown the exclusivist sectarian spirit that marked its communist princess. I'm about to finish, I'm sorry. It has taken a long time. However, this tells us that even when we fully realize the global character of the world problems today, and the PI realize fully the global. Actually, this is their basis. And their idea is that we are in a global crisis, and we should find the global solutions. So even when we fully realize the global character of the world problems today, we may follow exclusivist, hierarchical, and undemocratic ways of communication and organization. We know that the Communist International was reduced to a tool in the hands of Stalin administration for a third solidarity to healthily live, unlike the third international counterpart, possibly unlike the PI, the Progressive International. It should be democratic space of diversity and debate. To conclude, the aim of politically conscious solidarity is to produce a we, one that does not necessarily abolish all other we's, but stands as a universal level of our self-consciousness. We, the living, as a new conscience and as resistance to the othering machine. Othering machines, they are black, they are the Muslims, they are the aliens, they are refugees, they are tools in the hands of this or that. Yeah, and the othering machines are mainly, in my perception, the sovereign Cartesian ego that wants to dominate the world and nature, murdering nature and realizing his agency, it is usually his, not usually actually, it is almost 100% his agency in ecocide, and the sovereign states that tend systematically to be genocidal. There can be no way out of solidarity crisis which is not at the same time the way out of the global crisis, moving from worldliness to l'amor mondi, caring, which means caring for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yassine, so much for this very interesting speech, and with like also, I would say that it's not an like your approach is not quite popular in the circles of critical thinking, leftist intellectuals. So it's also interesting from this point of view. For instance, like the concept of universalism that's important for you, and you I understand the concept of the first solidarity as a concept in which the universalism is in its center. So in the center of the first solidarity is universalism, that is understood in a new way somehow. But but it's as you have written, as you have spoken, it's not something that is popular, because you've got this post-colonial movement, for instance, that oppose universalism as a form of coloniality and as a form of power. So I was just, I tried to make some notes about the first solidarity, because I the most interesting part for me is about how we can rebuild, how we can redefine, how we can practice solidarity in a new way. I think that the important elements of this project, of this concept, is that this new solidarity has to be a vision of a different world, has to be politicized, so it's impossible to create solidarity that is only a pure, the marketplace of the causes, as you call it. And it creates new meanings and symbols, and it's something maybe we can come back later, because I think it could be interesting to elaborate a little bit on what it means to create new meanings and symbols nowadays that are shared globally. And you said also about shared responsibility, and it's something okay where we will get some examples like pandemics, for instance, or like climate catastrophe, or other issues. But maybe we could also speak together like what it means, like how we could create this shared responsibility, because it's not, I think, obvious thing. Also, you said about global equal rights, but I totally agree, associated with this concept of universalism. Of course, dismantling Eurocentrism and the production of we, that is a resistance to othering machines, and we as living, inhabiting the world. Yeah. So maybe now I would like to ask Inga. Inga, you are in Lebanon, in Bekaa Valley. You are working with Syrian women, Syrian refugee women, helping other Syrian refugee women. So in this very particular context, and I would like to ask you about universalism. So because from your practice, like being there in this quite dense social, cultural environments, how you can see this concept of universalism? Because I guess that it can be also problematic, but maybe not. Like so how can you see, like, from your practice, from like being with very concrete refugee Syrian women in a very particular context, the concept of universalism? Is it helpful or not?
Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to thank you, the Kiev team and also Warsaw team, for having me here. Yeah, as I came from Beirut. I'm finishing my field work there at the moment, working with Syrian feminist activists. Actually, I think the main question is like how we approach universalism, and whether we come with some ideas or whether we can create those ideas through the common discussion and collaboration. So maybe I will tell you like few sentences about what brought me to Lebanon, because this is actually what brought me to Lebanon is what Yassine was actually talking about now. So this idea of trying to find this third solidarity, this third way of working with refugees that would be based on creating spaces of collaboration between those who are in need of support and those who provide the support, taking into account all those unequal power relations and all types of crises that you, Yassine, mentioned. The unequal power relations that we are not going to get rid of. So if we want to create this third solidarity and we want to practice it, we still need to find ourselves within this unequal power relations. So for the past 3 years, I've been researching, observing, and collaborating with Syrian feminist organizations in order to learn from them how they organize, how they support each other. So potentially, if I know more about this, we could find this space of collaboration between us in Europe and Syrians themselves. And I think like the first most important part is what you mentioned about denying, especially to refugees, like political agency. So the crucial part of their work and of actually my research in the way how I frame it is actually to really look at different activities through the perspective of politics. And of course, I'm not talking about institutional politics, I'm talking about a broad understanding of politics. I mean, even if we look at formalities, most of refugees are excluded for institutional politics anyway. But like to look how people manage to change different power relations, starting from the level of home to the level of their community, then going further from the grassroots to transnational level. And this is something that most of Syrians will tell you, that like in order for them to feel more emancipated and powerful, like we need to recognize those different types of politics that they practice on a daily basis. But like, how do we get to this universalist ideas? So when I arrived to Lebanon, I realized that although humanitarian and development sector that you also criticize in your paper has been criticized mostly by feminist activists from the global south since 70s. So what I'm telling you also is not new at all. But still, these days, like especially refugees are kind of trapped between two oppositional ideas. One is the idea of still like very dominant Western feminists who basically come in order to liberate and emancipate Syrian women, and they have their own idea of like what liberation means and what are the strategies to achieve equality. And this is basically trying to create we, but without acknowledging multiple we's. And on the other hand, you have different organizations that try to reproduce in a way traditional gender roles. They basically offer different traditional activities, but they actually don't leave the women's space to actually redefine their political activity or define their gender roles. So looking for this third way, I focus on initiatives that really try to work on the grassroots. And basically, the starting point is very easy, like including those women in the knowledge production. And I'm not talking only about, knowledge production that's been postulated by post-colonial feminists on the level of academia or on the level of like transnational networks. I'm talking about like including them in knowledge production on a daily basis and on a grassroots level as well. And in order to be able to achieve it, at least the women I work with, they unconsciously very often draw inspiration from feminist critical pedagogy. So basically the starting point is the experience of those women themselves. And by focusing on this everyday experience of struggle, you can actually create a space for people, regardless their social class, educational background, ethnicity, or religious group. And then later on, these everyday experiences are a basis or the foundation for analyzing different power relations. Power relations starting from patriarchy and home, but also going to different levels, the economic system, the colonial and post-colonial relations. So if we start from this level and we start having a discussion, first leaving them a space for discussion so they can do it in their circle, but also then joining the conversation, this is the way we can see there are some common elements. And there are some common ideas of freedom, of equality. But it's completely different if we come with those universalist ideas and we try to impose them. It's going to be rejected and we are not going to find this we that we are looking for. But if we actually do it through the conversation, it's a long process, leaving everyone a lot of space to reflect, then we actually see many of these common elements. I do trainings for Syrian women on transnational feminist movements. And we also try to look at diversity within movements, diversity within strategies. And to be honest, I'm always surprised how much they can relate to many of the examples. But this is also my prejudice in a way. That's why when I started it, I thought that, yeah, maybe this will be too foreign, it will be too Western. Yeah, but actually, going step by step, we see that there are many common elements.
Yeah, thank you, Inga. And Max, I'm thinking like, also in the context of the performed lecture about the historical issues, like, Yassine said about this process of migration, of solidarity from the global south and from this part of the world into the west. And in the West, we have this, humanitarian, capitalist way of solidarity, and how how you perceive it. So how is, for instance, this somehow forgotten archive of relationships between Eastern Europe, Eastern Bloc, and the global South. Is it something that could be could give us some inspiration, some some experiences with which we could work, or not just reproduce them, not use them like something that is made to measure, but to think about them as something that could trigger new ways of thinking, or could help us in re-establishing certain relationships, or to think about this, first solidarity, or is it something that should be put on the to the library, and we can
No,
think about
just-
it as an interesting context, but but it's not something that can give us fresh ideas today.
Basically, Yassine just said that it is a sort of a library, because if we think about like what we have universal, I mean in Kiev, in Ukraine, in Syria, or in Lebanon and Poland, the one thing that can be universal is not the past, it's not the present, it's the general dream of the future, yeah? And I think, I have a feeling that I'm here in Kiev, yeah, and you have here in Ukraine, you have of course I'm making it really simple, but in the east you have the Russian troops, yeah, and on the west you have some people who have to go to Poland to work, yeah. So how you can relate to camps in Lebanon or to Syria, yeah? I mean, we can all just relate to one thing which is simple, that we all, women and men, Muslims and Christians, communists and socialists, etc., we can just dream about a future which will be more a dream, something not really concrete. But on the other hand, when I was listening to Inga, I was thinking, about my son a week ago. He made with the people from his class, he made 4 jars of the soup for the people on the Polish-Belarus border, yeah? And he doesn't, let's be honest, he doesn't give a fuck about any sort of trans-periphery communism and so on. He just made a soup, And for me, this is like 4 jars of soup that next day just went to the border. It's like enough, Like I have a feeling that this soup is universal, yeah. And this is something that we can all relate to. I mean, you in Kiev, in Ukraine, somebody on the Belarusian side of the border, somebody who is already, a Syrian or Iraqi family that is going through Poland, to Germany, because they don't want to stay in Poland, they want to be in Germany. And I'm just afraid that just stick to the concrete. That will be my manifesto for today. And of course, remembering the past, but not to concentrate too much on the past, but more to dream about the future.
Okay. Because I like the idea of sticking to some concrete things. So I was wondering, when Inga, you were speaking about the conversation. So when you say, so there are certain conversations that are happening in the circles that you are not part of, because of you being a white woman coming from Eastern Europe as a feminist to work there as an ethnographer and as an activist at the same time. So these are like circles that are somehow not yours, but at the same time you said that at a certain moment you joined the circle. So I'm very much interested in this moment. So the moment when you join the circle, and the moment when the conversation produces something meaningful, that is more like producing something that we have in common, so this kind of universalism, than something that is that excludes each other because of certain identities, for instance.
I can give you concrete. It's patriarchy. And the idea of what our fathers or uncles do at home. This is very often a turning point. So when we discuss, this everyday struggles and this knowledge coming from everyday experience, I'm not only talking about, complicated things. I'm talking about very often when I have conversation, I try to do my interviews when I do them as a type of a conversation and discussion as well. And then they tell me, like I'm becoming this community leader now, and but I also need to work, and I have children, and it's a third burden. It's very often the case of women, and my husband wouldn't even make himself, water. He waits for me to do, and then I tell him, you know what? Like I don't think my father knows how to make himself tea, and then they're like, really, like, is it that bad in Poland? I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is a common experience. Maybe it's getting a bit better, but this is this common experience that we actually share, But I think like these two also specific elements that allows me to join the circle. It's my acceptance that we may not agree. And like while I may still strive for some universalist ideas, and I do believe that some people want similar things and have this vision of the future, I also need to acknowledge the fact that their idea of freedom of equality and the strategies to achieve it may not be exactly the same as mine. So I think like this is the moment like of relief that actually allows you to have this conversation. And the second element, I think that in my conversations, in my workshops that I've been observing, it's very important, is this really like intersectional critical praxis, but not on the level of a concept, but on the level of actually living through it and discussing it. So first that the activists that I work with, they try to bring together women, very different Syrian women, in order to give them a space to become community leaders. So we are not talking about elite Syrian civil society, we talk about like just ordinary women from different social classes. But I think what is important is the moment when we don't only talk about intersectionality as what kind of different factors of oppression, but also different types of privilege. So when I speak openly about my privileges, but also telling them what it means to be Polish sometimes in certain circles, but also when they start realizing that they are not only oppressed as Syrians, but there are also different elements related to social class, access, mobility, which is a huge issue in Lebanon, that can create this more complex image and realize that actually, yeah, we are not only similarly oppressed, but most of us have certain privilege.
And Yassine, can we like add to this, certain privilege, not only like some similarities in oppression, but also something that maybe is common in privilege? Can we add to this a kind of shared vision of a better world, or as Max said, a kind of dream, so a kind of vision of the future? Is it something on which we could also create this first solidarity?
Well, this is what I'm interested in, and this is what I struggle for, actually. It is important, first of all, to make things clear, and I hope I helped myself, and maybe this is a help to differentiate between the weaknesses and what was not working well with these two waves or two generations of Sunnah. Now, what should push us forward is that we are really in a crisis. We don't have alternatives. We don't have a vision for the future. We don't have a project. We don't have a utopia. I know that that the utopian thought was criticized harshly as something coupled with totalitarianism, with terror, which is partly true. But I think after the fall of communism, the world is quite bleak. We don't have a future. Some countries and some classes are still doing well and they are okay, but we don't know where we are going, and I'm afraid that this is already opening the doors to the past. So my starting point is this situation. we are in a Tina world. We are in a world without future. What attracts me as a Syrian who was a refugee, or you don't know actually, I left Syria, I was 53, so I was not very young. I was doubly young, so to speak. And I lived in Turkey for 4 years, and now in Germany for almost 4 years, or a bit more than 4 years. So my perception of my analysis here and other papers and essays is a reflection about the Syrian cause, my condition as a refugee in more than one country. And I was political prisoner for good years in my country. So I feel that the world, in a way, is a macro Syria, is a bigger Syria. And that my country is, in a way, a microcosm, is a small world. And actually it's true, because when you have the Russians, the Americans, the Iranians, the Turks, the Israelis, and Syria is not a big country. When you have all these, and many sub-state actors from Turkey, from Iraq, from Iran, from Lebanon, and when you have 7 million of Syrians, 1/3 of the population, almost 1/3 of the population, displaced externally, 1 million in Europe, and 3.5 million in Turkey, and almost 1 million in Lebanon, and here and there. And actually, according to, I am digressing a bit, but I'll come back to a recent Human Rights Watch report said that the Syrians are scattered in 217 countries in the world. I thought that we don't have 217 countries, we have hardly 200. But this is what mentioned, and this is their, and they are credible source. Usually Human Rights Watch. So when you have the world in Syria and you have the Syrians in the world, Syria is the right place to think of the world. So this is my point. As a Syrian who has passed, I have a trajectory, I mean, rich in a way and tragic in another way. So I think we, in a way, my destiny, my fate, and the fate of my country, and now to a growing degree, the fate of the world are interlinked. And I think we have to build networks to benefit from the old experiences and to build networks as exercises for this new solidarity. What I'm interested, and I found interesting very much in what Inga has said, is not a ready-made ideal. I'm as a previous Marxist, and in a way I am still a Marxist, and as someone who's indebted to the Enlightenment tradition, I'm still skeptical about ready-made ideals. What Inga just said is very interesting, because we are here about interaction, not imposing a vision that we have. She's not applying on Syrian woman. She's meeting a previously existing plan. No, she's trying to find, through interaction, the possibilities for working together, for developing a new way. And this is, I understand the universalism in this way. It is not a ready-made ideal. It is something we build together through interaction. Yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Okay, I think that maybe it is a good moment also to to open this conversation to you, to the public, and I'm very curious what you think about what we are talking about right now, about this new universalism, about first solidarity, about the need to unblock our political imagination and somehow to transgress this moment of Tina, so this personal alternative moment. So, and also, maybe you have some ideas what we can do. Like, it's very practical, concrete question. Maybe we can think also together about this dream. So, what we can do about the future and how we can create these relationships of solidarity in a new way. So maybe some of you, anybody would like to comment or to propose or to ask?
Thanks a lot. I would say, paraphrasing Marx, that we need to, when we set some goals, we need to think about material possibilities of achieving these goals. So, thinking about this material context in which we're acting, material but also I would say ideological and political, I think we need to consider the conditions of production of fascism. What Yassine talked about, the kind of genocracy and chauvinism, etc. Because you can see historically that the rise of fascism follows the neoliberal destruction of various achievements of the 3 decades after the war. So Loïc Vacan has got this good, I think, way of describing neoliberalism, that this is about transferring the power of the state from the left hand to the right hand. So the left hand is about redistribution, protection, care, and the right hand is about punishment, monitoring, disciplining, etc., etc. So I think this is what pushed populations in many places around the world, including Poland, pushed into this chauvinistic direction of xenophobia and a kind of extreme protectionism, or what is also labeled welfare chauvinism. So we want redistribution and social state, but only for us. I believe this is a product of the situation where the neoliberal job market, where we all compete viciously for employment, is actually the only vehicle of social integration. For, not only for the migrants, but for the society as such. This is the kind of a production of society in neoliberalism. So obviously, I totally share the opinions that you all have, and probably most of us here would have this kind of open attitude towards migration, etc. However, I ask myself, what is the risk that a migrant would compete with me for a job back in Poland? It is not impossible, but it is so unlikely that I can easily skip this. It does not exist in my mind. It's mostly a political and ethical decision. If you're a taxi driver, if you work in a shop, whatever, you work in a warehouse, construction site, etc., etc., you are in a different position. You are, I know it's vicious, it's wicked, I don't want to defend, I would like to understand the situation. So those people, in a very evil way, they sort of like defend the remains of any sort of welfare than they have. So I believe it's the lack of resources. And also, and I think it plays also on a different level, what Max and Inga were talking about. I think solidarity requires resources, symbolic and material resources, right? Max said that his son made a soup. It's great where you are able to make a soup, you have a surplus to share, right? And also you have, because we have, Jonathan Friedman, the French sociologist, described it in a good way, that in this neoliberal global world, it's easy to create a solidarity of the elites because elites have resources to communicate, to travel, to talk, to educate, to understand, etc. While people in the lower classes are pushed in their indigenous positions because they are like trapped in their locality. So I think this really hampers a kind of solidarity of the wretched of the earth, right? And I think actually the examples that you showed of during the lecture, Max, Bartek, and Radek, who is not here with us anymore. You're here, okay, because I thought you were, well, great. So I think this is, the same applies to the so-called first solidarity of early 1980s, that actually the Soviet period produced a working class that felt secure, that was sort of cherished by the regime, because everybody was telling them, you are the soil of the earth, you are like the most important class, this is the dictatorship of proletariat. And a huge material and symbolic distribution happened, especially in the first 30 years after the war. And I think this produced a kind of readiness for solidarity, not patronizing solidarity, as Yassine was saying, but a truth and solidarity, the movement of solidarity, the first solidarity, did this, writing the letters to working people of other nations, and it really was a kind of open attitude. On the other hand, the post-1989 Poland, the so-called the Third Republic, produced the populism and fascism we are witnessing. So to finish this, I know I'm talking a little bit too long. I would not fetishize the national state. I think it needs to be overcome. However, I believe that enacting some sort of social redistributive policy on the national level, even if it does not have a direct aim of fostering solidarity, it sort of precisely creates this means and conditions of possibility for such a goal as international solidarity to be established. Thank you. It's not really a question. I'm sorry. It's more like a
great comment.
Yeah, thank you, Jan, for the comment. It's a really great comment, and I agree on many levels, especially with bringing this material context to the table and speaking about conditions of possibility of production of fascism. But at the same time, I'm wondering, how is it possible, practically, that people from the urban middle class in Poland are very anti-refugee, or are opposing this dream of first solidarity, and at the same time people who are underprivileged and lack resources are really struggling to do anything they can to create this ties of solidarity. So speaking also about about classes, I think that the middle class and the upper middle class in Poland, for instance, it is the class that is supporting also authoritarian right-wing ways of governing. So that's what that it's not for me as easy to say that people who are underprivileged and that lack resources are the basis for the fascist term. So that's So I'm wondering also what you think about this, because practically you can see that many people from the eastern part of Poland, for instance, now are trying to help refugees in many ways. People who are not who are very poor people also. And at the same time, many people from the middle urban class, they create, anti-refugee, fascist, racist discourse. So.
Yeah, very briefly, this is all true. Actually, the middle class is the most shrinking and precarious class now in most Western societies. In Poland, somebody said that average member of the Polish middle class is 2 payments of mortgage away from homelessness. So that's but I totally agree. I don't think it's a one-to-one relation. However, when you look at markers of social position that correlate with voting populist or choosing fascist, Obviously, class understood as a symbolic position, like a cultural capital, and class understood as a material position, it correlates quite strongly with the political choices. Of course, again, this is not a necessary determination. So there is no guarantee for somebody who is well off would be open, and then somebody who is not well off necessarily will be a fascist. However, it entices, it encourages certain positions. So when you look at Poland or the UK Brexit referendum, there's a great correlation. You can look at the map of the coal plants that were closed during the Thatcher era and the result of the Brexit referendum, and they very neatly correlate. The same is true about the US and voting for Trump. So yeah, but obviously it's not a kind of automatic determination. I totally agree. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how it looks from a local perspective, from here. I know you know from Kiev, from the Ukraine, because we're talking about Syria, about Lebanon, about Poland now. But how it looks from your perspective? Because you know, I have a feeling that this universalism is really hard, because in every country you have different, you know, sort of tensions and problems, and that's why also it's really hard to relate to something universal. I just want to add that Janek Sobak was speaking now. He will have a very interesting lecture tomorrow. Did you say about it? And he will introduce one more notion, because we were talking during a lecture about socialist globalization and changing names, etc. And Janek would talk about Global East. So listen to him tomorrow. But you know, I'm wondering what you think, Vasil. For example, but maybe somebody else. I don't know, because I know Vasil, so I'm just saying.
Waiting for me to answer.
Or somebody else.
Like,
I don't know. You are first in the line.
Yeah. Well, maybe I will comment on this a bit later, but yeah, because basically I don't think there is such a huge difference between the Polish and the Ukrainian context, respectively, in that regard. I mean, of course, I mean, being a post-Soviet and being a post-socialist, it definitely means various dimensions, right? But at the same time, I think we are somehow in the same pot. But I would like actually ask you to comment on the matter that you, Bartek, already mentioned, meaning this situation on the border between Belarus and Poland. Because apart from obvious like humanitarian comments and all these kind of critical approaches that you usually hear and see from the civil society organizations and those who are helping the people stuck there, I'm really wondering what's your take on this situation in the regard that that's basically very well, usually it's been referred to as a kind of a migrant crisis, but this is of course like totally misleading term. It's not a crisis of the migrants themselves, it's a crisis of the EU and stuff. But I'm really like wondering, especially in that aspect of this situation, that unlike the previous crisis of migrants that the EU has faced. This one is really kind of a special because you've got basically a self-proclaimed psychopathic autocrat who is just making fun, right? I mean, he's playing games. He is landing the planes. He is like getting people from Iraq and from other Middle Eastern countries to Minsk. So like also constantly discursively blackmailing the whole world. So it's so I mean, should we really take into account the conditions and the reasons how and why those people were brought on that place? So when we are dealing with this, what's your, I'm curious about also in Yassin's perspective in that regard, because obviously the previous flows of migrants who were coming, these newcomers coming to Europe, right, it was a kind of a natural repercussion of the warfare and unbearable conditions to stay in their respective countries, right? But this one is, I don't want to quote this weaponization of migrants and stuff, but this is really special because, is it being referred in among those organizations and people who are helping those people on the border? It's not even the question whether to help them or not, right? But how would you approach those political backgrounds that made those people end up in this kind of a double trap in between of nowhere? Should we take into account how we should refer to this in general? Of course, I'm very interested in the perspectives of the Polish participants, those who are working with these issues.
We transfer the question back.
Who would like to answer it? Like
Inga.
Inga?
Me?
I don't know. Would you like to answer? Like,
I can answer shortly, but I've been observing the situation from Lebanon, so it's a bit different. So if you ask, should we take into account how people got there, my answer is no. Because what made people leave, it's not Lukashenko, it's the situation in their countries. And those people would go eventually anyway. It would just take them more time, it would be more difficult way and more dangerous. And I know that the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border is extremely dangerous, but it's less dangerous than going through Libya. And some of these people, at this moment, Syrians are going through Libya to get to Europe. So, of course, it's a very complicated situation. When I heard this for the first time, this idea of hybrid war and Lukashenko, peace was saying this, like Polish government was saying this. I honestly thought they got nuts, that it sounded insane. But of course it's true, but I think it doesn't necessarily change the situation. Did it encourage more people to go? Maybe some, but actually people have been taking this route for months. And the people who I know, Syrians who've gone this route from Lebanon, they did not decide in last weeks. They decided because their friends went in April or in May. So this was before the whole process was really facilitated or encouraged by Lukashenko. So I think like most of the people would go anyway. It would be just take them more time to gather resources because this route is relatively, it's much cheaper than any other route. It's even cheaper than the route in 2015 because it costs, let's not go into details, but it's just easier and you go by plane instead of walking from Lebanon or from Syria to Europe. So I think for me, it doesn't matter how they got there. And also, I don't think that the situation is much different from Erdogan in 2015 and Turkey-EU deal. Just another authoritarian psychopath. Just, a different country, even blackmailing EU even more. Because he had more clear demands, I think, he demanded access of Turkey to EU, he demanded particular amount of money, etc. And he's been doing it all the time, saying that he will let Syrians go if the European Union stops paying. So I don't think that the situation is much different. It is different because it's closer to us. And that's what makes it different. Not for Hungary, for example, because, the crisis in 2015 was very visible for them, but for Poland it wasn't. But as I said, it's perspective from Lebanon.
Yeah, I just would agree with what Inga said, but I think that the situation is not very different. Like that also like the places from which people migrate now, these are not safe places. These are not like the conditions are still there. So quite unbearable conditions.
So that's one thing. Another one is that this route was always there, but it was not the popular route. So that's another thing. So it's not that Lukashenko, created the route and created the whole the whole movement of people. Of course, he facilitated it. He gave the trigger for this somehow, or opened some possibilities for this. But it's not that he was somebody who initiated the whole process. Another thing is that on the other side of the border, so in Poland, you also have some crazy autocrats who are playing their games. So it's not only Lukashenko's games. So somehow they play Lukashenko's games because they don't do it wise. Because doing pushbacks and creating the whole situation is somehow giving the weapon to Lukashenko. So it's somehow they're weaponizing Lukashenko. So they give some evidences for Belarusian propaganda. And for what I think about Lukashenko is that he tries to somehow reveal the authoritarian aspect of European Union, and that's his aim, and maybe also Putin's aim. So that's the play. So to reveal that the European Union with this the discourse of human rights and things like this is in fact authoritarian entity. So it was really like the paradox when I read, I think 4 days ago, that Lukashenko invited Polish journalists to Belarus to give them possibility to report from the border. You understand? But in 2020, Belarus was recognized as the most dangerous place for journalists to work. And now in 2021, Lukashenko is inviting Polish journalists because they cannot work on the Polish side because we've got this state of emergency and nobody can get into this zone. So that's the paradox. But it's somehow the Polish authoritarian government they gave this weapon to Lukashenko So that's also my commentary on this. Yeah.
Can I just add something? Because it gets cold here, As it is cold on the border, even more. It's even more cold in Lebanon, in the camps, because there is no electricity, as you said. Inga, when she came here, she said, "Wow, there is electricity. You have all this capitalist, advertising on the shopping malls, and it needs so much electricity. So when you are coming from Lebanon, this is amazing, Even coming from Warsaw, I had this feeling that you here in Ukraine, you have the same enemy as we have, which is capitalism, and it's much stronger even here than it is in Poland. And I don't want to finish this discussion, but I have the feeling that Yassina and Yanexova, that they are right, because the main enemy, the thing which is behind all of these things is just capitalism, And when we come back to the roots, we have to be a Marxist to see that this is really a class struggle, And when I was taking the photos, of them, I started, to think about, the Facebook and the Instagram, and I realized that that I will put my photos of this anti-capitalist, trans-peripheral, new solidarity discussion, that I will give these photos to, these guys from Silicon Valley, and, that maybe, even if at the beginning I was a little bit against this idea, but that Yassina is right, that you have to be a communist at the very end. Thank you.
Yeah, but maybe not finishing it yet, and coming back to you, maybe you'd like to comment, to add something. We also have like Hungarian perspective here, a Latvian perspective, Czech perspective, like people from this Baltic and Eastern Central European countries. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will be the Hungarian perspective. But I think just the discussion and also the lecture performance together, I think it outlined the many issues we are talking about here today. And I also worked on solidarity. I particularly looked at solidarity between Hungary and Palestine during the Cold War. And I don't know, it's more like a comment, but so it was not, it was of course historical and archival research, but I also had other forms of research that I conducted and just experienced. And so I think two fault lines that I found within my own investigations and also just doing the exhibition Transperipheral Movement. So, and I'm just wondering about your take or your experiences, but so two fault lines that I encountered. So one was, and I think when we had this online discussion within the Alt Biennial, and I think Bartek, it was actually you who mentioned, so the problem with with Cold War solidarity and that was practiced by socialist countries and the Eastern Bloc in general is that it's really hard to recuperate it because then we're somehow recuperating state practices. So that's a complex issue in itself. So how we relate to that. And the other thing that I and also this global East and global Eastern Europe and global South discussion. So I also found one, and I don't have an answer to this, but one of the fault lines that I kept coming up against, including myself, not just other people's work that I looked at, it's that this Eastern European perspective is highly prioritized. So for instance, if we look at relations, then it's always why is it relevant for Eastern Europeans? So the question always have a center, and the center is Eastern Europe. And so it's even though we think we talk about transnational relations, it has a center, or like a departure line. And so I don't know. So basically, my question that I kept coming up against is really how to work transnationally and how to do the transnational, not just to say it. Yeah, that's.
Thank you, Esther.
Answer. Now we have to answer this question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, thank you, Esther, and thank you both for the amazing lecture performance and for this discussion. And yeah, like maybe I will try to answer to your question with some more practical example, but that doesn't really include this solidarity movement somehow in terms of like maybe actual working class people or that sort of work, but in terms of when you do art history research and contemporary artwork, that when we were working with issue of Latvian refugees that were leaving after the Second World War in mass, like they would leave to Sweden, to Germany, to New York, and many Western European countries, but also ending up in Brazil, in Australia, and also across the world. And that also, I think, this moment in the Second World War that totally changed the Baltic countries through this fleeing from the Soviet regime. And then we really tried to work on that project as a project of this shared history, that it's not only represented in Latvia, but also in all those other partnering countries, and really trying to understand what it means there. But I have to say that it was only in the Western countries where we found those collaborations, because we kind of didn't have like actually resources to do that research and to go like further than these sort of like almost like metropolitan centers. But it was true that sometimes for them it would seem like, oh, this is maybe too minor of a story, what these Latvians were doing there. And sometimes it was interesting that it kind of coincided with the idea that they're also interested in what other overlooked, minorities were making their art scenes. So it was like interesting, but that really kind of concerns the art scene only, or not the solidarity as such. And just to comment maybe on the Belarusian, Polish, Latvian, Lithuanian situation on the borders, I'm just thinking about it a lot. Like now in Latvia, the situation is a bit more calm, but I remember that when it really happened, it was such a quiet, like death quietness in Latvia. No one was organizing any solidarity or any protest. I mean, some people were, but with really little. And I remember when the situation was happening in Greece, there would be a protest, and even I would go to a protest saying like refugees welcome, but because it was not at our border where they had to be welcome. And that is so ironic, and I'm still thinking about it, that there hasn't been any protest, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga.
Yeah, thank you. From maybe just last note from a Czech perspective, that I wanted to add that we just had election recently in Czech Republic also, and somewhat democratically was elected a new government and a new parliament that doesn't have any single left party representation at all. So I'm questioning myself all the time, like where will be the solidarity coming from when the overall discourse is just the neoliberal right wing, and the only solidarity I see hope in is bottom up and solidarity, like you were talking about, Inga, like creating spaces together by listening to each other, and maybe also hope from practice here is our allied movement. So I just wanted to say thank you all sharing this moment. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you, Veronica. And I'm thinking maybe, Vasilino, if you would like to say something, or maybe we have some more comments. But I think it's really getting cold, so we can slowly.
It's universal,
We are almost out of time. So I think it's a nice note to end up with what Veronica just said, and wanted also to thank so much to our speakers.